so much. So welcome. We see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you so much for coming back. We had a short summer break and we are very, very excited to be here. And who the heck are we? For those of you who are new, we are the healthcare user group for Salesforce, and we're a virtual meeting. So it's really nice. We can meet with anyone from anywhere. So we do have sometimes international visitors. We're always glad to see them as well. You want to go on, Corinne? So the healthcare user group is, we use Salesforce in healthcare, and there's unique challenges with that. And so we welcome anyone who does work in healthcare. It could be that you work in a hospital, a physician practice, med device, or you can be consulting in that area, be an actual client, or actually be an employee of a healthcare, medical devices, and so forth. So we're here to support all of that through the virtual meeting success community, and we do post our recordings of our meetings on YouTube. Next. Of course, we have each other to help us. So who the heck are we? Mel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Melissa Beitzer. I go by Mel. Project manager. I have been in the Salesforce world for over 15 years. Is it probably a lot of people can feel this. You think as you're getting into it that you're really getting to know Salesforce, and then every day it's like, wow, there's so much more that I had no idea even existed. So it's a very vast world, and I just am really loving getting to learn more and more all the time. A fun fact about me, I have 2 teenagers who get so embarrassed that I admit this to people, but I cannot go running without listening to 80s hair band music. So if anybody is a runner, try it sometime and maybe you'll like it.
Corinne?
Hi, everyone. My name is Corinne Pokrant. I am a Salesforce consultant. I've been in the industry since around 2009, and I am currently focused in the HLS vertical, thoroughly enjoying all of the things I'm constantly learning. Like Mel said, every day is a new adventure when it comes to all of the different tools that we have access to. And my fun fact is that I just started a new Dungeons and Dragons campaign that is all rogues. So it's pretty fun.
Very cool. And then myself, Tina Woodall, I have 16 plus years in healthcare. I drink the Salesforce Kool-Aid almost every day, even when sometimes, as I finally like to say, I'd like to add alcohol to my Kool-Aid because some days you want to. And I do have on there, but it's a stale fun fact. I met my husband at MeshCom in January 2002. But literally July 22nd, my husband looks at me and says, I think we forgot our anniversary, which was July 17th. So I think that's even more current, that we just forget each other's anniversaries, and we're okay with that. We just look at each other and laugh and go, oh yeah, happy anniversary. And but I've been enjoying telling people about that success story from Match.com, which actually seems to be more and more common. On our call today, we have 2 awesome guests. We have John Robinson and Josh Dix, and I'll let them introduce themselves. John?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm John. Josh and I are both with Slalom. I'm a member of our experience strategy and design practice, and I've been, I guess, easy enough to say, like, a student of, educator of, and practitioner of design for about 20 years. Most of that background is in the design agency space, and then came to UX consulting a few years ago. In the last 3 years, I've done a lot of design work in and around Salesforce. I always describe, I used to use design to sell products, and now I use it to solve problems. I used to design for people, and now I design with people. And that's kind of where I see a lot of the value in terms of how I measure, my love for what I do. And my fun fact is, in another life, I would have been a Kurt Vonnegut scholar. So if there's anybody out there who is connected to any user groups, any Vonnegut user groups, that's maybe my pitch to have me come and talk. Josh, you want to go?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Josh Dix here. I'm a strategy consultant with Slalom, and been leading teams for a long time. I've worked in data and analytics, marketing, HR, leadership development, nonprofit. I've covered a lot of industries. Mel, I'm also a big fan of 80s hair bands. I was a musician and toured all over for a long time. I would have tried to become an 80s hairband star, but I lost all my hair. So that was the end of that. So now I just play little songs at dinner to get my kids to eat their vegetables. But so anyway, glad to be here. Glad to talk about change management.
Josh and I, when we do things together, we always make a point that one of us wears a hat. Yeah, so you don't confuse us.
Thanks, guys. And that does lead us into what are we talking about today? So we are talking about change management. And I'd like to do something a little bit different. If we just want to go ahead and stop sharing, Corinne, we do have a slide deck, but it's really just bullet points. This is a dialogue, this is discussion. And what we want to do is talk through what is change management and really pulling on Josh and John's experience. And then at the end, we can actually walk through a use case, because as I put on LinkedIn, change management is really not a sexy topic, right? People are like, "Ooh, baby, change management," but it really can make or break your success. And then actually someone, I forgot his name on LinkedIn, was like, "No, it is a sexy topic because you're making transformation and change." And it can be. And then John and Josh maybe can change my mind on the perception of that. So if everyone's okay, I'm not going to show a slide deck with bullet points. We're just going to talk to that and add flavor. And for those of you who've been here before, unmute, speak up. It's very open. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, we will be monitoring the chat as well. So if you want to type a question, then please do that. So we're going to start off with the basics. What is change management? I'll read the boring definition: a structured process that facilitates successful changes to technology and processes within an organization. How boring. All right, John, Josh, what say you? How would you all define that?
I'll let you take that one, Josh. Yeah.
Is that how this is going to work?
And I'm setting myself up for failure by doing this, because anytime Josh speaks, he doesn't leave anything good to say. So he'll give you a solid answer on this one.
So yeah, John, I guess thanks. I mean, what Tina read is right. It often is a structured process. That certainly as consultants, like what gets sold when we sell change management. Sometimes that's through like ProSci or the AdCar method, or other things like that, and that will certainly get the job done. I've heard change management as a practice or as a function described as like the people side of change, which is really just like a recognition that like there are actual people involved, but it's still like just do what we tell you. And so I think when I think of change management, I think about partnership, I think about collaboration, I think about listening. I heard a science teacher say one time, he said, all science begins with empathy because you're trying to understand a problem. And I think good consulting starts the same way. And, and like in John's work in design, like good design thinking, it like makes your path through change management much easier because you've designed something that is more easily adopted. It's better understood and welcomed by the user. And so I think, a lot of this change management is just kind of, understanding what people need, what they're going through, and then walking along with them through that journey in a partnership kind of way. All right, I'll shut up there.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Like with anything starts from a perspective of understanding, or at least having to like build that perspective of understanding first. And the example that I always use related to, we're all mostly, we work in the technology space. We implement, we build and deliver technology to people. But if we don't start by understanding what those people need first, then who knows what's going to happen next. And we can build like the coolest mobile application that really meets all of users' needs. But if we didn't talk to people first to find out like, oh, you're using desktop computers in what you do, or you're, only so this certain area only supports like iPads and not mobile phone devices. Well, then we've put all of our time and effort and money into something that nobody's going to actually be able to use or support, right? So foundational, it's asking lots of questions to really know, what those expectations are before you ever get a little bit further down the line.
And in healthcare, it's even more critical because there's a lot of assumptions. One implementation that failed I wasn't on this one. Doesn't mean I haven't been on field implementations, but this one was really interesting. They developed a technology and interaction with the technology, and they didn't take into consideration the nurses wearing gloves couldn't do the fine typing that was needed for the application and the tool that they were going to be using, right? So everything looked good. They tested everything, but the users, they just couldn't because of how they had to interact with the device. So that was really, really interesting from that part. So that also leads into, and I think you all both elegantly covered, is, why do we need the change management? And basically, I think other than reading the 7 bullet points we have there, which we're going to share out the PowerPoint. So you're not being, by the way, the recording and the slide deck will be shared out like we normally do and as takeaways. But, why are we doing that? We can develop technology, but at the end of the day, if our users don't adopt it, and we've all been there, they all go, yes, I love it. Yes, I'm going to use it. And, usually there's only 20% adoption of technology. It doesn't matter how sophisticated, how cool things are when they're rolled out. And in healthcare, they all have their spreadsheets. And I have a phrase that every time I kill a spreadsheet, an angel gets wings. Maybe not the most sensitive top way of phrasing it, but everyone has their spreadsheets, everyone has their way, and healthcare is so disconnected. So what else would you say if John and Josh, if we were talking either internally, we're an employee of healthcare or a consultant, why do you need change management? Like that needs to be a line item, right? Why do we need this? Why can't we just have the geeks design, roll it out, test, and deploy? What is the argument for why do we need change management for either the employees or the consultants on the line?
I'm going to imagine Josh has a much more sophisticated answer, but for me, it's people are unpredictable, right? People are people. And you can always still, like, the one thing that you can predict is that most people are always going to be fearful of change. And so that spreadsheet might be perfectly fine, right? But if you think about, a long time ago, I worked in a public university, and there were they're very siloed organizations, lots of different like collegiate departments and et cetera. And you would find that like people just, they have ownership over the things that they create, right? Like there's so much more to getting communications out than maybe some like small email newsletter that you might have that goes to 25 people in total. And it takes you a week to put together and whatnot. And you can tell people like how much you're going to streamline a process for them, how much better it's going to improve their life, but it's not going to have any impact on them until they actually have that in their hands and see that and get proof of it. So no matter how logical a change may seem, you can always assume that people are going to be fearful of it because it's different, right? And it's not what they're used to, and they may just love that thing that they have, no matter what it is. Josh, I'll let you jump in if you got anything there.
I mean, I think you nailed it, and I think Tina set it up well. That it's the why is adoption and its value. I mean, I think we got into this because we wanted to solve problems and add value to what folks are doing every day and make their lives easier through technology. And if we don't understand that, or they're not going to adopt it, then like it's a bust, right? Then we're just kind of going through the motions. So I think the question why change management is sort of like, maybe why not just lead the way. I look at it almost from more of like a leadership perspective of like, let's actually like lead them to a higher value. And what were you gonna say, Tina?
Well, so in healthcare specifically, and I'm going from my frame of reference, my experience, and please others jump in. I've run into too many times where management says, I know what my employees are doing and I know it needs to be solved. We run into it all the time, right? We do.
Everywhere.
It is. So how do we get around that? How do we convince them that you're brilliant and you're awesome and you're wonderful and you're out of touch? And we really need to do this because they will, if you don't get engagement, if you don't get buy-in from your staff and find out those, hidden bodies and, roadblocks, you're not going to be successful, and make it that the management gets that.
There's also, I feel like, an element of why focus on a problem if it's not a problem yet. That tends to occur too, where
Right.
it's, why am I worried about something that may or may not happen later on down the road? Let's focus on, the priority items now. And it can be one of those things that just gets shuffled off constantly on the priority list.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Again, it goes back to like having to talk to people to validate ideas, to form a clear understanding. And it's a waste. There's nothing I would want to hear less than say like, I know something, because when I equate that to like top level data. Like if somebody came to me and said, our website is fantastic, we don't need to do anything. Well, how do you know that, right? Well, we're looking at our analytics and we're seeing that like we've got 300 visitors per day over day, consistent engagement or whatever. But stuff like that, it tells you what people do, but it doesn't tell you how they felt, why they did it, or while they did it, or why they did it in the first place. You can't get information like that without talking to individuals, right? And so you can't form an understanding until you understand, why did you do this thing? What choices led to it? Did you have satisfaction from engaging with it? And so I would say that, if you take like the iceberg model, right? Like knowing is that little piece of the iceberg that sticks out above the water, and understanding is like the 85% of it that's underneath the water that you can't see. You got to ask a bunch of questions to get down there and figure that part out.
So far, I haven't heard anyone talk about how they successfully changed management's opinion that you need to put this as a line item in the budget, right? So we've talked about, we know the value.
Yeah.
But what has been successful arguments? Paul, you came off mute. What's up?
So I often hear from customers, and that they want to build a new system in the image of the old system that's not working and they don't like, because they're all kind of attached to the old system. And that's the first challenge. And then the next challenge is, I don't know if we need to manage change management. We're good at that. We can do that. And that I've often found, if I ask the question, in the last 5 technology rollouts, how successful were they, and how much of the success or failure was related to user adoption? You can see their face changing. But yeah, it is tough. I don't know if you've seen something similar, but that's kind of what I've experienced.
That's a good call out, especially if you know their history and you say, so tell me about former successful or not successful projects, and then say what was a differentiator, and then you could pull that thread out, like, oh, and then you can correlate that. So that's a really great point.
I think some of it comes down to how you frame an engagement too as a consultant. And I think it's why we do discovery, because then if we can carve out room for discovery to go ahead of implementation, as John said, to talk to everybody, just then you have real data to present back to leadership to say, hey, we spent 3 weeks or 6 weeks with your folks. Here's what we saw. Like, actually only 20% of people are using this thing anyway, or whatever it is. And I think you make a way for yourself to build that understanding, so that then you're actually building the right thing. You can get people aligned, and you can use that discovery process, that first phase, to get leadership aligned as well.
Yeah,
I think that's something.
sometimes.
No, I'm sorry,
I was
John.
going to
Go
say,
ahead.
like, sometimes you try to convince somebody that you have to throw out the hypothesis, and that's a really hard thing to let go of. But to communicate that, like, what we need to do at the beginning with discovery is like find out an answer, that because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the answer is. We don't have any like specified we might have an educated guess, but we're not there to like focus on confirmation bias and just try to like find an answer that aligns with what we're hoping for.
Good points. So I think I want to call out that Josh and John, if I'm hearing correctly and being at Slalom right now, that, and this is weighted, this statement's weighted to the consultants on the line, is that the project has that already in what was basically SOW. You already have the line item and you already have that. There's other consulting that I've done is actually they do the planning and analysis, and then they present the SOW. Like you pay for, okay, we're going to do 2 weeks discovery, pre-discovery, and we're going to put that out there in that regards too. And that is an option. So, it could be just as the template of, of what the company does as a consulting firm. You just automatically know we're going to go ahead and build this in. Whether the client recognizes the change management phrase or not, we're going to put it in there because we know that's successful, right? And that provides the relationship and dynamics. If you are a healthcare employee and you're part of a large enterprise organization, I think if you're in a hospital setting or a large physician practice group, you can reach out to your PMO, your project management office, to see if they have someone there to help you. But I would recommend, or you can also consider having asking. And I'm not pitching. This is not a consultants pitching this form at all. But this is more of, you may want to look at an outside resource to help guide just from that aspect. So the larger firms, you definitely have resources. You just need to reach out to your project management offices and see also who your change management, even HR actually does change management too, because they have to roll out new policies and procedures. They may have tools for you to reach out to help and assist with that, because again, majority of us on here are consultants, but there's several people on here who are not consultants, and I recognize some of those names. And so you do have resources other than, we're going to tell you, oh yeah, listen to this discussion, we're going to point you to a couple of books and we'll go from there. So there is that. So we know as consultants, we're going to build in a line item for billing on that, build that in. And then if you're not a consultant, you do have other options. So speaking of tools, let's pivot a little bit to like best practices. And you guys have been, Josh, you've actually been talking and touching on this, and Paul, you've also even touched on a couple of things, and Corinne, but you want to identify the stakeholders and evangelizers, critical. If you don't have your executive champions, as I like to say, you're already dead. You have no one to back you. You're just not going to get there. Creating a strategy and following it, define your use cases, scope, impact, and risk. Prioritize and plan ahead, communicate and schedule and test. And even if you're communicating, this is a big one for me. Even if you're communicating, I have nothing to share. But as soon as I have something to share, I'll let you know. That is still communication. Out of these change management best practices, what would be your favorites, John? What would you say are your favorite ones that you always make sure, no matter what, out of these best practices you always do? And it could be more than one.
Yeah, I'll go first. I tend to think, I don't mean to be the militaristic, but I tend to think about like air war, ground war, and grassroots. And so I think about air war, what are like the broadest messages I'm giving to the broadest audience? And those are easy. I mean, those are like simple, just sit down and write a newsletter, write an email, spend 15, 20 minutes doing that, talk about what's going on, keep people up to date. And I think about like ground war, and that's more of like training and structured meetings. Maybe sometimes it's structured meetings with leaders, but I just think about what is that structured sort of attack that we're going to do, and training is a great example of that. And then the grassroots is like the networking piece. It's the change like network, the champions, the folks that you have on your side that are around the water cooler. Well, when we were all around water coolers, and that are like helping with the messaging and kind of talking people off the ledge. And I think for me, you need to do all three of those things. And when you do, it doesn't matter what activity you put in there, but if you work through people, you do something structured, you send some messages, like you can win most of the time.
Yeah, I'll jump off of what Josh was saying at the end there, is like having a team of champions or a group of cheerleaders for, especially when you're launching a new product somewhere, or like completely changing someone's process. If you could have people at kind of all levels of the organization that are there talking about it a little bit, water cooler talk, like, hey, you heard about this new thing that we're doing? I saw it. It's really cool. Like, what kind of problems are you having? And maybe even pulling in some information. But then that goes down to like that point where you're actually starting to socialize that new product with the people in the organization. And for me, it's, doing usability session testing, putting it in someone's hands, running them through some scenarios and finding out, like, how do you feel about this? How does this work? What are your overall thoughts? And that's really when you kind of capture someone and they go, oh, I've been hearing about this. This is significantly, but hopefully significantly better than what we've been using up to this point. I'm going to go tell my other colleagues in the sales department or whatever about this and help get them excited for the rollout, to the larger organization. And then the champion network just kind of keeps rolling.
Absolutely. Man, I was just thinking about, this might be a wee bit of a tangent, but you're talking about the water cooler chit chat, and when we were actually we weren't virtual, right? We were actually in person and things like that. But when you get to a meeting, you usually should have had like 3 meetings before then. Communicate. So by the time you get to your meetings, there's no surprises. I think that's actually Mel Corinne and I are talking about how to give soft business advice to people. It's like, especially if straight from college and into consulting or something like that. It's like, no. By the time you show up to the meeting, this is probably the 3rd or 4th meeting you've had on this topic. This is just the official meeting on the topic, which is easier to see if you're not virtual, you're having a business. So for those of you on the phone, Paul, thank you for chiming in. Is anyone else here who's done change management? You have any favorite tools or any favorite things that help you with your change management? We're going to go to gotchas next. That's going to be even more fun. But anything, favorite tools? Nope, you're all quiet this evening. Okay. So gotchas. When I was a wee younger, not saying I'm older, I'm just saying when I was a wee younger and doing technology, it was, to me, you just make the change and then you roll it out. And it wasn't until the first time that I was taking nurses from paper to computers. He wanted to talk about very angry people and who's conveniently a convenient pinata for people who are really mad at their management, but they don't want to tell their boss they're mad, is IT. And it's very fascinating what my perception of what made sense and their perception of what made sense. Again, testing something and people are wearing gloves and doesn't make sense. And that was a surgery scenario I gave you on that one. It was a very eye-opener. That was a big gotcha, because it's like in my 20s, I'm like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. This is what you should have. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be beautiful. And I can create a dashboard for management and kumbaya. Yeah, no, it was called run from the nurses who are about to kill you and throw the laptop at you. So what are some gotchas that could have been preventable? And at this point, I expect a lot more from from the participants. But what are gotchas that are like classic? Not naming names. We don't want to do that. But classic. Like, oh my goodness, if we had just done this, it would have saved ourselves a lot of time and aggravation. Yeah, neither one of you going off mute right now. No, come off mute and say. Josh, John, you can start. I already started. So do you have any you want to share from the trenches?
I totally aligned with what you were saying. Josh and I were actually talking about something similar the other day, whereas like, you could be doing a very simple moving somebody from one piece of technology to another piece of technology that enables them to do all the exact same things. It looks a little bit different. They may access it differently, but it's not changing their job function in any way. And it's kind of like, there's still going to be that hesitancy, right? And it's like, oh, I'm used to doing all of my work on by hand on yellow legal pads, and I went to the store and they were out of yellow legal pads, so I had to buy a composition notebook. I can still do what I need to do with it, right? But people are still going to be fearful of it. I don't have an example just yet. I'm going to wait and see what somebody else says, though. I have an analogy. But...
Mel, Corinne, I know I'm not the only one who's had those delightful experiences where expectations and execution and being received, it did not have an alignment.
It's more that I have a lot of examples and I'm trying to pick which one.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
No, but I think that the point you were making is a really valid one. And I think that that's something that you see as a consultant kind of take different forms on all of your different projects at some point. Like there's always going to be some kind of resistance there in some capacity from someone in a project at some point. So when we're getting into those situations, I think one of the biggest pieces that's always helped me is the communication portion and really being able to be prepared with explaining why you're making a change, how it's going to be benefiting people, and hearing them out if they have, feedback on it. So communication is in one way, like you're needing to be able to explain to your end users or to the team, the reasoning why you're making those changes, but also if they have feedback for you, being aware of what they're telling you and putting that into consideration too, and not just kind of moving forward with what you think no matter what. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Mel, if you have something else.
I just am having flashbacks to a project, and it was around the managers not finding out what, you know, the feet on the ground workers really liked and didn't like. So worked with managers, created this great application, go to training, and someone flat out said, "Oh, this is a pile of heaping garbage." And that was the first feedback we got. So needless to say, it was not successful, and it was not something that anybody was going to want to use, except the managers who weren't the ones that were using it.
And was it the managers saying that they want you to engage with the users? Were they trying to be a layer between you, or how did you get
They
there?
didn't want to bother the users because they had work to do, things to sell, you know, so they were going to handle it all. They knew that what was best for their departments. And yeah,
That's what I was going to say. It goes back to that. We know what they need.
Yeah. I mean, a heaping pile of garbage is not something you want to hear when you're starting UAT.
Well, I actually have an example that's the reverse of what everyone's saying, where it was a Salesforce implementation. We were building a product and we were launching it globally. And all of the heads of the different global business units were saying, nobody wants this, nobody's going to use this. It's everyone, all of our salespeople are set in their ways, and they're happy with what they have today. And we actually took it to usability testing and got feedback that said, like, this is so much better than what we're doing today. I love this. This gives me everything that I need to do my job, and I don't have that now. And we presented that data back. The people in charge of those business units basically said, we don't believe any of this. There's no way that this is true, because it didn't align with the expectation that they had, which is they're all going to hate it. So they actually asked us to change the way that we were doing our usability tests, formulate the questions differently, invite fewer people, et cetera, et cetera. And we made significant changes, and we got the same feedback. Very positive, right? But they just, it was almost like the people in the middle are the ones who wanted it to fail. The users loved it.
Oh, thank you. You know what? I found the biggest barrier for change is how much it impacts a person's ego and how much it impacts their livelihood. So technology is usually a job killer. Let's put it where it's at. Yes, it does improvement. It does all these wonderful things. It also eliminates positions. So whether you're doing enhancement at your job or you're doing it as a consultant, if the impact is on a person's ego, i.e., I always like to laugh about IT politics, and he who has the most applications win because they get the bigger budget. So now if you're rearranging or reallocating, you can have a lot of sabotaging because you're touching their ego, because their title, their domain of power, or you can be touching someone's livelihood. And you will have to be very careful of competing agendas of why people want it to fail. So what you're talking about. And I think that's really, really critical, is that not only is it about being afraid of change, but sometimes we're being asked through technology to improve things. Yes. Get rid of waste. Yes. Enhance, go faster. Well, who are we impacting, and how are we impacting them, and how are they going to negatively go after that? So I think, Karen, you were going to unmute, and I see you just typed something. You want to reshare what you said?
Yeah, just never assume that your leaders, your steering committee, whoever is making the decisions on the project is sharing that information down through the rest of their organization, or the whys they've made that decision. We've had projects where the steering committee makes decisions and the SME group, who is supposed to be involved in the day-to-day, has no idea that those decisions are made or why. So they're arguing with us about what they want, which isn't in alignment with what the steering committee has set for decisions. And we're kind of stuck in the middle saying, well, we're going with the decisions that your leadership has made. So we've been trying to fit in the middle, communicating between the two groups of the customers.
Which then also gets to some of our gotchas. And I love, by the way, Josh, how you reframed it as identity. id, ego, or the comprehensive, the identity, how is that impacting them? But also, Karen, I think it also is to the culture. If we're working in a culture, we're actually working in the culture. If you hear a cat crying, it's because my cat's basically saying, y'all don't count. Him and his bowl of food count. He has food. But anyways, so if you have a culture that you're working in or you're consulting to, where that by being open and transparent is not encouraged, which we all know, we have environments, we've seen environments where like, oh yeah, everyone's open and transparent, but they can't. That's going to make change management harder. And actually, Josh and John, how have you worked around that? Have you been in cultures and working with cultures and others that you have that happening? How do you work around that? How do you create a culture that you can get what's needed to get that feedback and to do the job, right, for the change management?
That's a toughie. And I think that's one of the most difficult things too, is when you have somebody gatekeeping and you can't get to the people. And so I've definitely like gotten in trouble before just jumping the line of command. And I just look at it as like sink or swim in some ways, because, and I don't know that the companies I have worked for feel this way, but I'm like thinking about my reputation and the kind of work that I want to stand by. And like how I want to lead something is I want to understand the needs of the people. And so quite often I've just, broken the rules and just gone and talked to the people on the front line and tried to build relationships with people. Because I think ultimately all of this is about trust. And so in some ways, it's the difficult part is learning how to speak that trust language in different ways with the executive who's trying to solve a problem in the company, the middle manager who just needs this project to get done so they can get a promotion at the end of the year, and the frontline worker who's like actual like life is either sucks because the work sucks, or like you said, Tina, they're at risk because something is going to change significantly for them. And so for me, that the success revolves around my ability to speak that language, understand with each of those people, and build trust in a way that I can get more access. If you can't get it, it's a bust.
Yeah, and something that started to touch on there too is part of rolling any new initiative out, whether it's like process change, technology change. Part of the fear too is that like it not only is this going to change my job, but am I going to have a job? And that's a big component of change management, right? And as consultants, like sometimes that's the hard part of the job, is to say like, you may be part of that conversation that leads to, do we need to cut 100 or 1,000 jobs or something like that because of this change? And I think it's always like the right thing to do is to start from that perspective of like, not just saying we need to eliminate jobs because they're people, but like, how can we transition and find like other opportunities for people to still be part of this ecosystem, right? Luckily, that's the type of thing that I'm usually able to avoid. I don't know about you, Josh, if you've ever had any examples of.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's similar, and it's kind of related to another question like Tina asked about gotchas. I mean, I think for me, the biggest gotcha has not been taking a long-term view, like especially when I wasn't a consultant and I was just like running technology projects in financial services. Like organizations are slow to change. Like that is reality. And I think sometimes whether or not I've heard the perspective of the users, or I'm coming in bringing industry best practice, my biggest problem, gotcha, has been that I want it to get done right now, the right way, right now. And I'm like, I know the answer, right? And sometimes I've seen that on projects where like, oh, we got to get this company agile like right now, or we got to get these folks. And I'm like, listen, that's going to take like maybe 5 to 10 years. So if we don't get them, complete agile transformation in the next 6 months, but it takes 5 years, what does that tell you about what the work you need to do today? And it's like less urgent, it's less, bossy, it's less like, there's just a lot about it that when I take a longer view, I'm able to just sort of slow down and see like, this change is actually going to take a long time. And we can't like eat the elephant all at once. And I think that has been the biggest gotcha for me, and is the biggest help biggest strategy for me is to actually just pull out the timeline and say, this is going to take a lot longer than we all want it to be. Like the real change, not just like, hey, we put this app in here instead of this, but the real like value change.
And then double or triple it if you're talking healthcare, right?
Well, I was
The
going
amount
to
of time.
segue. I was actually going to say that was a perfect segue for me into like healthcare. So I think I was talking with you gentlemen about this, or I was talking to someone about this today, is that healthcare leadership versus your typical industry, like technology industry. Technology industry leadership's rewarded for innovation and being progressive and being quick. Healthcare leadership is rewarded for being conservative, not being sued, and not being in the news. They get consensus, usually healthcare leadership, by having 10 other people around the room nodding their heads, because leadership in healthcare traditionally, obviously we have our outliers, generalization, but usually are very conservative, very, very risk averse, very risk averse. So this is a healthcare user group. We're looking at change management. So when we're trying to implement change in a very risk adverse, changing the Titanic, maybe an iceberg, right? And who, by the way, Josh, they're trying to recover from COVID, slicing their elective surgeries. Healthcare is a business. It is about generating revenue, whether profit or not. And that sense of urgency and the change, and they're being forced to change, not necessarily that they want to do. It's not necessarily everyone. There's a lot of us, we know, we understand these problems, but it's actually a lot of changes being forced on healthcare. So it's not even like they're showing up and saying, we want to change. It's more like, yeah, we got to change. So let's look at a use case. I know I talked to you, gentlemen. I don't know if you have a use case that you want to throw out there, or you want me to throw out a use case that we can say around healthcare. Like, how would you go in and solution out a change management use case when you have a healthcare environment that is really the executives are dictating a vision that the users and middle management have not, it's not coming organically from them. How would you approach that in healthcare, which is actually pretty common? I love it. John's really quick to not come off the mute, Josh.
Oh, is that a question for us?
Yes, it's a question for you. Anyone else can
Well,
contribute.
I mean, I do want to follow on that. I was on a panel a couple of years ago, like a healthcare panel, and there was a physician on it. And I've always remembered, like, he told me it takes on average 17 years to implement change in healthcare related to physicians. This was his personal opinion. This is what he was telling me. That's what he said. I don't know if there's any data to back that up, but he was like, if you expect me as a physician to do something different, you need to go talk to somebody in medical school, because I'm not going to change the way that I do things. And so that's always something I've kind of held on to as an expectation, right? When you talk about like putting new tools in the hands of doctors, how reluctant are they actually going to be?
Yeah. And I so there's a lot there. I think the medical school idea is interesting, but I think Tina's right. Like people are often like actually reacting to changes around them. We look at, we're in the fourth industrial revolution here, right at the knee bend of a lot of change, as artificial intelligence like is creating like paintings that are being sold for like $50,000 and stuff, and automated trucks driving around. Like a lot is changing around this, and healthcare is like smack dab in the middle of so much of that, right? I think about like a situation that I've been in recently where compliance, regulatory, accreditation, all those things are central to the process. How we started to talk about it, and really it was kind of one of our main stakeholders, I think, but you described it more of as the regulatory risk side of it as the floor, not the ceiling. And I think that was helpful to say, like, if we can start with the regulatory thing, if we can start with avoiding risk as the floor, what does it look like to get to the ceiling? And what I watched happen was like, people had all kinds of problems they wanted to solve. So if we could say like, hey, yep, we get the risk thing, we're going to solve for that. Here's how we're going to solve for that. What value would you like to add on top of that? Then the ideas really started to flow. But in some way we had to assure them that like, we understand that. We're not going to build up to that. We want to start with that and build up from it.
I love the positioning of that. I love that because we have to, in healthcare, we have to acknowledge there is regulatory, there is management. There's a bottom line, you have to meet that HIPAA, all those kinds of things. And there has to be that assurance, that acknowledgement that checkbox will be checked, or the multiple checkboxes will be checked with that. You know, John, I want to go back to something. I've actually was talking to someone else and I agree. I don't think we're going to see a true transformation, until we have a turning of a generation, not doctors per se, but actually executive leadership. You know, the embracing of, you know, a little bit more radical thoughts that no, there is generation who truly wants to share all this information. There is groups that want it. They're like, we're perfectly fine if we have one health ID number, fine, whatever. We need to consolidate and not make it so ridiculous and jumping through hoops, right? So I think it's not only generational in people, but not only doctors, but I also think generational in leadership that needs to have a transformation. To the point though, to what we can do today, is I love, Josh, how you position that, right? How do we check off the boxes, and how do we say, you know, we're checking that, and how can we build from that and free people up? Because again, being in healthcare as long as I have, it's my first thing. It's like, how are we negating risk? That's the cat behind me, by the way. He has food, but if you don't walk out to the garage and freshen it with just a smidge of kids
You
cat.
can see the bottom of the bowl, so it's empty.
It's actually can be full, and you still need to sprinkle something on it and give them 3 pets. You know, 3. I love you. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, are we done? Yeah. Anyways, I digress. I was telling Josh and John earlier, I can edit things out. I'm gonna edit that part out. You all will see the transparency of me saying, "There's the cat, demanding bastard cat that he is." I'll edit that out. So, but I love how Josh, you did that, and I do agree, John, that it's generational, and we're getting there. We're so close, right? I think we need legal reform, but when we're right now talking to our healthcare, whether we're an employee or if we're a consultant, and how do we to do the change management? I think let's take advantage of regulatory, let's take advantage of risk, and tell our leadership, if we do not do change management, we do not know the unintended consequences to our patients, right? Use that to our advantage and reverse it. And that's another way too, because that's usually going to be we got to talk to either the revenue bottom line or the risk bottom line, and get them to say, look, you want us to minimize this? You want this to be successful? We've got to do this part.
So true.
Yeah.
There's like, I can think of 100 examples in the last 2 weeks where it was like, hey, we need to talk to somebody because we need to make sure we don't jack up your regulatory process down the line so that when a claim comes through, blah, 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 blah. And sure enough, we found ourselves actually talking to people in risk, right? But, you know, and they were glad to talk to us. But I think that's right on the money, Tina. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and back to like what led into that, I feel like we're starting to hit a point where people have an appetite for risk again, and bigger risk, right? Like we got like people who are just saying, I'm going to build a rocket and send myself to the moon, or I guess at least into outer space, right? And it seems like the moonshot idea is coming back now. I'm going to drive a fleet or build a fleet of self-driving vehicles that can deliver packages for me. So maybe we're not that far off.
Yeah, yeah. Man, I cannot believe we're actually coming up on time. This has been great, but I want to hear from anyone else on the line that may want to ask, or if you have a particular scenario you'd like to throw out on the table, have any collaboration on. No, you guys are having smooth implementation, smooth technology.
No, but I'd like to think about that change management comment you brought up. I've been through a lot of change in my life, and in different organizations, and some healthcare oriented and some not. But I do think that in healthcare, there is a desire to improve, always to improve. Mm-hmm. So I think it depends on how you focus that conversation. This is going to improve your patient care and how you're going to be treating your patients. And they're always looking for that so they can maintain magnet status or, their accreditation status. The other, I think, is that communication obviously is key, right? So you have to let the people know what's happening and then be okay with them going through the change process, because there's a J curve. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that, but there's a J curve that shows where a person kind of goes along the change process and how they fall out or don't, or they start to come back in and embrace it, right? And everybody has to go through that. It's almost like a loss, a grieving thing. So I think that that's important to recognize that and give them time to do it, to go through that process a little bit and accept it. And granted, we don't want it to take too much time doing that. And then the other thing I just want to share with you is that during change, people sometimes think the only change they're focused on or the person is experiencing is the one that they're talking about. And they could have just lost a loved one. They could have lost a pet. They could have lost, moving houses, buying new furniture. They're moving a relative into retirement care or something. There's all these different things that happen too, and that can exhaust your team. And I think that it's just to be cognizant of that when you're going through change management. And I look at it, and there's also DevOps, right? That's not really related to DevOps. DevOps is a whole other thing, and we can talk about Capado and when we should move those objects in custom fields and what needs to be done. And
No, don't go there, Kathy.
it was testing.
No. No. Don't.
I think that was a great
I'm
point.
off there, but I do think everybody should just Google the change management J curve and take a look at it. That's a great thing.
Yeah, you made me think of the David Foster Wall, or what David, is it David Foster Wallace, right? That's, I always get the name mixed up. But the famous commencement speech he had about water, right? When he mentions, like, the next time you're behind someone who's driving, erratically or slow or whatever, like, don't be so quick to get angry and honk your horn at them, because you don't know what they've been going through in their day, right?
Kathy, I always love your insights. And Kathy actually is not only being a very talented Salesforce professional, but she also has an HR background. So thank you for the reminder, Kathy, because you're right. Because we could be talking to someone and they're blowing up or calling our application a piece of crap. And it's really just like those nurses who are mad they had to go to a laptop or using me as a pinata. It could be that our product is just being used as a pinata because they are having other issues.
Right. Their patient could have just died.
That's
There's a lot going on there.
Oh, and that's another thing too, is where's the appetite for change when we have high burnout rates going on in healthcare? We have a workforce. They're burnout, depending on where COVID's spiking, where you're at geographically and what you're working with, that is another thing too. It could be sometimes the change management is to simply state you could work on the technology, but your people are not ready for this.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, we're, been thinking about that recently, where we know that a particular facility is 30% understaffed. They got folks, sitting in the waiting room, can't find beds, and it's, they're so stressed. And so part of our change management strategy there is to not push and to go in lightly and to be as, to not be disruptive into that, because just like Catherine said, there's a whole lot of other things going on besides this one little thing that we're trying to get done. And I think to see people as human and be human is a key aspect of this.
Love it. And I need these reminders too, because I am the nerd. I look at my technology. I love my technology. I revolve around my technology. I love the humans and the users who use it, but I am going to be technologically, I lean towards that. So having on teams, I'm very blessed to have John and Josh to reach out and to give that counterpoint. But if you are working in an environment that you do not have a Josh, you do not have a John, then reach out to your HR department or reach out elsewhere or others, or even the user groups, and look for someone to provide that other perspective. So we have 3 minutes wrapping up. Anyone else have any closing thoughts as we get ready to wrap up? No, I really love this conversation. I really, really appreciate everyone who's here. Next month, we are having a walkthrough on doing Marketing Cloud with their suite of tools and patient engagement. I think a lot of you all enjoyed it when we did a Miro board and we actually designed. So we're going to do that with Marketing Cloud patient engagement, and we're going to design how to use that. And we'll come up with a use case. If you guys have ideas, feel free to email it to Mel, Corinne, and I. And we are going to have Jordan Seeley from Slalom. Can you tell where I work? Yeah. So we're going to have Jordan Seeley from Slalom. It's going to be there. You all saw him from Shield, but actually his true brilliance is Marketing Cloud. He's just also by the way, how to be brilliant with Shield too. And we're going to have CJ Buskey. I worked with him at Coastal Cloud. He is a Salesforce lead solution engineer and marketing cloud. He's brilliant, 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 brilliant. I'm very happy that we're going to be able to have him as a guest as well. So if there's nothing else, John, Josh, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll post the recording and the slide deck out by this weekend. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.